Now, in India, protests over farm laws continue. There's a lot of noise that has taken control of the narrative. There's little discussion on the actual issues, the real provisions of the law, and why they may be problematic for some. Now, some global celebrities have adopted the cause, the likes of Greta Thunberg. She has expressed solidarity with Indian farmers through a tweet. And then she came in for a lot of criticism from her supporters and critics alike. We spoke to one such person who has been endorsing Greta's climate activism, but has now written an open letter to her. The former chief operating officer of the UN Sustainable Energy Organization, Mohinder Gulati, he joined us from Melbourne earlier today, and he's offered a crash course to the likes of Greta Thunberg and others on farm laws, asking celebrities and people with a lot of influence to first educate themselves before commenting. I spoke to him earlier today, and I started by asking why he felt the need to write such a letter to Greta Thunberg. Listen to this.
There were two reasons why I felt compelled to write to her. One is the reason related to her, and second is the reason related to the discussions, debates, and in the media and otherwise on the ongoing farmer agitation. On the first one, as you know, I was the Chief Operating Officer of SE4All, and my organization was vested by the Secretary General with the responsibility to build consensus for sustainable development goals. And I had left by 2015, but then I saw Greta Thunberg and the way she went about it, the way she built a whole global momentum around this issue. I was so pleased that finally, we had built up this engagement and involvement of youth so much that it had become a global movement. And I wanted Greta to use her political and moral capital to build more consensus in the coming COPs to exhort global leaders into more rapid action, which is what she has done very well. So I thought if she gets into these kind of local political issues, which are far more complex, and there are a lot of wheels within wheels, and there are a lot of conflicting interests, lots of time vested interests, which will suck her into a political vortex and will erode her authority. So that is the reason why, that was one reason why I felt compelled to write to her. The second reason was that the debate on the farmer agitation, unfortunately, at least to the extent that I have noticed, was not very substantive. It was superficial, that the issues that were being debated were, there was lack of consultation. Okay, really? There was no non-democratic process in legislation. There were these expanded demands that were being made, which were not a part of the law, about MSP and others. And I felt that this was very superficial discussion. There was no substantive discussion on the contents of why do we need these agricultural reforms, what should be the contents of those agricultural reforms, what will be its impact, who will be the losers and gainers from this, and how do we protect the legitimate interests of those who will be hurt by this, and what is the transition path. And many of the people were commenting on these things without getting deeper into some of these issues.
Right. So there's freedom of expression and everyone's entitled to their opinion. But when celebrities wade into a controversy without a clear understanding of the issues at hand, they come in for a lot of criticism. Do you think the onus is on them more than others to ensure they know enough about a subject before speaking on it?
With the celebrity status and with the major influencer status comes a major responsibility. And therefore, all those whose voices get amplified, or a cause gets amplified because they have taken it up, they have a higher benchmark for responsibility. They should look at not only what the issues are, look at the complexity of those issues, understand that, and take a more nuanced approach. Because after all, these reforms are very necessary for development and for poverty reduction and for improving the rural livelihood and agricultural incomes. Also at the same time making the agriculture less resource intensive and less damaging to the environment. We need to do that. And therefore, one has to understand it is not just a question of human rights or democratic rights, because all those people, they say 90% farmers, as I have said in my letter, who are silent, who are actually going to benefit from it, they also have human rights. I felt that in India, there are these enough robust democratic processes, institutional processes, which come into play. It may look chaotic from outside, and I have spent 25 years outside. So these may look chaotic, but actually under that chaos, there are very robust processes.
And yet there are people and influencers from all over the world who believe that they must weigh in and they must lend their support to one side or the other for justice to really happen. What then is your advice to the likes of Greta Thunberg?
Not only Greta, I mean, I have a lot of respect for her, I have a lot of admiration for her, and I want her to continue to focus on the climate issues, which is an existential issue for us. And I don't want her to erode her political and moral capital by becoming a divisive lightning rod when everybody gets together in the UN to talk about these things. And my suggestion, I mean, I'm nobody to advise, my suggestion also to the farmers and farmer leaders would be, look at the issues, not the interests. The average rural household income in India is 9,000 rupees a month. I mean, that is pitiful, 9,000 rupees a month. And if you look at the divide, the differential between the urban and the rural income in 2020, before pandemic I'm talking about, urban incomes were 12 times that of the rural income. And if this structure of the economy and these rates of growth and business as usual continues, this differential between urban and rural will grow to 18 times by 2030 and 24 times by 2040. Now that kind of inequality, income inequality, is not sustainable. It is politically not sustainable, economically and socially not sustainable, and it is not even desirable. Why is it so? Because if you look at the structure of the economy, about 85% of the GDP comes from manufacturing and services, which grow at 7 to 8%. 15% of the GDP comes from agriculture, which has been growing at 2.5–3%. That's the long-term growth. That would be wonderful for any modernizing economy. But the flip side of that is that 60% of the population of India lives in rural areas. Therefore, by proxy, dependent on agriculture one way or another. And 35% of the urban manufacturing and services are mostly in urban. 35% of the population benefits from 85% of the economy, which is growing at 7%, 8%, while 65% of the population depends on 15% of the GDP or economy, which is growing at 2–2.5%. So how can you overcome that growing inequality and differential? And therefore, in 2010-11, when we were doing this work, I had called this as a time bomb ticking. And I had been cautioning that this differential between agriculture and the rest, which is rural and urban, is a time bomb. And what will happen is that the political backlash of that will become so much that the government will have to redirect the budget to more and more for welfare rather than on investment. And that will then restrict or constrain the India's objective and aspirations of double-digit growth. So this is what is coming home to roost. So therefore, we do need to do something about increasing the agricultural income, diversifying their livelihood, not just only agriculture, diversifying the livelihood, diversifying the agriculture. And that cannot be done by government and government alone. If the very heavy presence of the government in directing as to what should be grown and purchasing it and then distributing it, governments do not do these things efficiently. Governments do it very inefficiently. We need to bring in the dynamism of the private sector, bring in the efficiency, bring in investment, but in a regulated manner so that the small and marginal farmers of India, which is a very, very large number, that they are not thrown at the mercy of an asymmetrical negotiation between them and the private sector. So therefore, we need appropriate laws, we need the regulation, we need the proper institutional mechanism to protect, but we also have to bring in the dynamism of the private sector.
Couldn't agree more. Mohinder Gulati, thank you very much for being with us on Gravitas.
Thank you very much for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.